Good rule of thumb, whenever this guy comes out to the podium to tell us all about how great of a job he's doing upholding the principles of American law, it's code for the opposite.
Today's verdict makes clear that the Justice Department will do everything in its power to defend the American people and American democracy. I am grateful to the department's prosecutors, FBI agents who have worked on these cases with extraordinary diligence, skill, integrity, and courage. The department will conduct all of its work in a manner that adheres to the rule of law and honors our obligations to protect the civil rights and civil liberties of everyone in this country. Today's verdict is another example of our steadfast commitment to keeping those promises.
That, of course, was Attorney General Merrick Garland, surrounded by the FBI's most important, including Director Christopher Wray, announcing convictions in the Proud Boys' January 6th trial, a case in which all of those supposed bedrock values were actually compromised. If you just take the reverse of everything he says, you're almost always much closer to the truth. Under his leadership, both in general and in this case specifically, the legal system is weaponized, your constitutional rights are imperiled, and no, these people are not courageous. In fact, they're some of the most cowardly, vindictive turncoats ever to hold these offices, as evidenced not by their commitment to the rule of law, as Garland commonly advertises, but as even the New York Times characterizes, their novel approaches in prosecution. It's a very nice way of saying norms be damned. We're making our own norms now. There is a reason that all the Justice Department's A-listers showed up for this party, and as we'll get to, it might be because this is just the pregame for the real party later. But yes, on Thursday, a D.C. jury convicted 4 of 5 Proud Boy leader defendants, Enrique Tarrio, Ethan Nordine, Joseph Biggs, and Zachary Rell, on seditious conspiracy and conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding charges. The jury deadlocked on those 2 counts for a 5th defendant, Dominic Pizzola. Pizzola was found guilty on charges of taking a police riot shield, and there are additional charges and convictions involved as well. But the substance of this case, and where it is a major legal outlier of significant threat to anybody who attracts the Justice Department's ire, is in that headline charge, seditious conspiracy. The New York Times notes it is exceptionally rare for federal prosecutors to bring that charge, based on a Civil War-era law to protect against the actual overthrow and destruction of the federal government. But even rare might be a somewhat insufficient description, because it's closer to never. Until last year, with the similar Oath Keepers January 6th trial, no American had ever been convicted of a seditious conspiracy charge. In only a few instances in the better part of 2 centuries, federal prosecutors have tried and failed to secure convictions, apparently only succeeding 3 times. There was one successful prosecution in 1995 when an Egyptian national was convicted in a plot to blow up several buildings in New York, and 2 other cases in the 50s and 70s involving Puerto Rican independence activists attacking U.S. government sites. So the fact that this sort of conviction is effectively a never event in U.S. history leaves 2 possibilities. Either the Proud Boy activity on January 6th actually was the greatest, or at least one of the greatest, government overthrow attempts since the Civil War, or it's just been absurdly dressed up to be. A review of the facts of the case and the court proceeding leads to a pretty obvious conclusion. Before we even get to the procedural problems with the trial, the biggest problem with this case is in its substance, or the lack thereof. The charges simply lack the necessary evidence. Prosecutors brought seditious conspiracy charges, but the problem is they don't have the sedition and they don't have the conspiracy. Sedition, in this case, is legally defined as opposing the government by force to prevent, hinder, and delay the execution of any law of the United States. The problem there is there's no demonstration of that use of force. The 4 men convicted on seditious conspiracy charges brought no weapons on January 6th. Enrique Tarrio wasn't even in D.C. at all that day because he was arrested over his burning of a Black Lives Matter flag in the days prior. Prosecutors are still pursuing assault charges, but so far they haven't substantiated those allegations with any conclusive evidence, and the jury has reached no decision on them, with the one exception of the previously mentioned case of Pizzola, who took a police riot shield and broke a window with it. Okay, but prosecutors don't necessarily have to prove violence. That's the conspiracy part. They only have to prove a plot to commit violence. Well, here, the case is just as weak. Conspiracy has a definition too. In this case, that legal definition is two or more people agreeing to try to accomplish a common unlawful goal. But the government can't demonstrate that agreement, so they have to stretch what an agreement actually is. Despite infiltrating the group and combing through thousands of group messages across multiple platforms for weeks and months, prosecutors could not present anything definitive. No communication that said anything close to, hey, meet me in D.C. on January 6th to overthrow the government. And that is why prosecutors instructed the jury nothing explicit is even necessary. A conspiracy can be entirely unspoken, actually. Just a wink and a nod agreement between two parties. The conspiracy can be telepathic, so long as you can plausibly imagine it in the defendant's minds. You don't have to look for winks and nods if you actually have the words, but prosecutors didn't. And the Proud Boy members who flipped to rat out their friends themselves demonstrated obvious confusion about whether there was any actual plot too. One of them testified that even though there was no explicit order or communication about attacking the Capitol, members of the group believed there was an implicit agreement to lead an all-out revolution against Biden. But the prosecution's other flipped Proud Boy witness testified that he was surprised to see the now convicted men and the rest of the group march toward the Capitol after Trump's speech. Well, if there was an unsaid but commonly understood agreement to commit the crime, then what is the surprise in witnessing it? We all knew it was going to happen because we all agreed to do it beforehand, but man, was it surprising to see it happen. Pick one. Even the New York Times coverage acknowledges there is no clear demonstration of a conspiracy or an agreement or a plot. The feds have a trove of internal group chats, and in thousands of messages, the worst the Times can highlight is a toxic stew of machismo, homophobia, misogyny, and even casual anti-Semitism. Yeah, I'm sure this reporter's text message history is impeccably clean, but even if it is, who cares? These guys are not convicted of conspiracy to commit edgy group chat or conspiracy to commit poor taste memery. They are convicted of seditious conspiracy. And edgy group chat does not demonstrate either part, the sedition or the conspiracy. The most damning communication the prosecution presented is that Enrique Tarrio once wrote 1776 in the chat. So next up, we'll get Thomas Jefferson, Paul Revere, and that damn insurrectionist basketball team, too. The numbers 420 and 69 are also banned. Those are conspiracy to commit drug trafficking and prostitution. And all of that is only the substance of the case. To call it flimsy would be to credit its sturdiness far too much. It's closer to non-existent. As defense attorneys characterized it, it's more like fairy dust held together with paper clips and rubber bands. But even if it is an incredibly weak case on the facts, prosecutors and the judge used some procedural liberties to patch it up. It doesn't matter how weak the government's case is if it reflects Democrat Party priorities and it's presented to a DC jury, because this jury is exactly what you'd expect. Half the jury members are admitted progressive activists, at least part-time, participating in women's marches, gun control marches, and Black Lives Matter protests. No jury member mentioned conservative demonstrations at all. This jury was selected during the national TV broadcasts of the January 6th committee hearings, making it all but impossible for anybody to be unaware and neutral on the trial's content, a fact reflected in the personal views of the jury foreman. According to his own answers, The jury foreman came to the case believing the Proud Boys planned the insurrection. In other words, having a conclusion on the case before the evidence was even presented. On Black Lives Matter, though, of course, this guy is much more forgiving of the occasional violence. Because after all, Black Lives Matter is just trying to highlight the discrimination against people of color in police interactions, he says. This was less of a trial and more of a whose line is it anyway sketch. Everything's made up and the evidence doesn't matter. And of course, the usual Fed infiltration was common in this case too. There were at least 10 and possibly up to 15 federal informants involved, more feds than defendants in this case. The prosecution blindsided the defense by waiting to disclose who was in fact a Fed operative until the last possible moments, minimizing the defense's opportunity to question them effectively. Beyond that, there was also suspicion of prosecutors deleting communications evidence in this case. Evidence prosecutors insisted was outdated and possibly classified. Under these conditions, the conclusion of this trial was as predetermined as the jury foreman's commentary about it. And so, of course, this supposed by-the-book, rule of law, liberty-defending trial and conviction, as the Attorney General is advertising it, is anything but. It is a threat to and an active erosion of your First Amendment rights, both in how your words can be twisted out of constitutional protection and how your mere associations can be used as evidence against you, as well as your due process rights to a fair and impartial trial. And I don't doubt or dismiss the idea that this trial is fundamentally about establishing a blueprint to get whomever these power-drunk feds may choose to target, you or me included, but it seems apparent this trial is designed as a test run to get someone more specific who they have always obviously wanted to get: Donald Trump himself. Recall, Trump remains under the investigation of special counsel Jack Smith on two fronts: his Mar-a-Lago classified documents case and, yes, his role in January 6th. And it's not difficult to see that the Justice Department is the one actually doing the winking and nodding here, building a factually and constitutionally dubious case against the Proud Boys that just as validly applies to Trump. Because if associating with people who committed crimes and using crude language is sufficient to bring a seditious conspiracy charge, well, I think we all know a guy with questionable associations who uses crude language. But we don't even have to look for the wink and the nod here, actually, because prosecutors, media, and a former member of the January 6th committee are all outright telling us this is their plan. During the trial, prosecutors frequently referenced Trump's "stand back and stand by" comment in the September 2020 presidential debate, an exchange that seems eerily prophetic watching it back now, with both Biden and Chris Wallace eagerly baiting Trump. Come on, you gotta disavow the Proud Boys. Come on, you gotta do it. As though they knew this moment would be useful for something.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared to
do
specifically
that,
do it? Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
who would
right
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by, but I'll tell you what, somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left.
If saying 1776 is seditious plotting, well then saying stand back and stand by plausibly is too. And it's not just what prosecutors highlighted to convince the jury, it's also what the Justice Department is highlighting to advertise the conviction. In the DOJ's press release, they note, hey, Trump said stand back and stand by before these guys committed these crimes, just so you know. Well then, why isn't Trump on trial for conspiring with the conspiracy is the obvious question. Just wait is the obvious implied answer. And that is not the only way that prosecutors tied this Proud Boys case to Trump. The prosecution's case was that the Proud Boys created their criminal group chat the day after Trump tweeted that a big protest was coming to D.C. on January 6th and you should be there, because it's going to be wild. But of course, Proud Boy communication had existed for years prior to that tweet. These guys have been friends for a long time, so presumably there is a reason that prosecutors selected that tweet as the origin for all of the evidence that they're interested in. It starts with Trump. Anything beforehand is irrelevant. Even if you think that's reading into the DOJ's intentions too much, fine. Don't interpret, just listen to them talk, or at least listen to their former friend in Congress talk. Adam Kinzinger, of course, the official tierman of the January 6th committee, said on CNN this week that Trump should be very worried now.
Donald Trump lit the flame. The Proud Boys were the flame. You know, both things need to be prosecuted, but if I'm in Donald Trump's camp, I'm going to be a little worried about this. And for somebody that's worked so hard on this, me and the January 6th committee, it's good to see that justice is being served, but it's not complete yet.
Yeah, we'll see if Jack Smith goes ahead and charges Trump with this same charge.
Now, of course, when has he ever said that Trump is in the clear? Never. Granted. But it is notable that the logic here is not, wow, hey, look, we got the masterminds of January 6th. Job well done. Moving on. No. The logic here is almost, but not yet finished. The logic is a step toward something, but not the steps completed. By Kinzinger's own words, justice is only coming, but justice is not yet here. Its commentary is backward as Garland's. This conviction is as unjust as any in our history. It is a step toward tyranny, not a step toward the Constitution as a matter of the First Amendment, due process, and otherwise. But of course, they will make it backwarder and backwarder in pursuit of that golden scalp. If you have any predictions about 2024, I'd say scrap them, except for two. And no, not death and taxes. There are only two even more certain guarantees. Merrick Garland will lie, and Adam Kinzinger will cry. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.